Hello, I'm Walt Bartman. I'm the founder and director of the Yellow Barn Studio, and we do a number of interviews of our instructors so that you will get to know who they are and what they teach and how they teach. And I think today we have one of our outstanding and very popular instructors, Ann Schlesinger. Ann has a really, is a very experienced teacher. She's, she got her BA from the University of Virginia. She got her MFA from American University. She did a postgraduate study work in the Fine Arts Academy in Munich, Germany. She was a Fulbright scholarship winner. She was an Annette Cade Fine Arts Fellowship winner. She was the David Lloyd Krieger Award winner, and she won the art prize at UVA. Ann is an adjunct professor at Georgetown University. She's also taught at American University, the University of Maryland, Northern Virginia Community College, and the Smithsonian. She's now an instructor here at the Yellow Barn. And I want to say, hello, Ann. How are you today?
Hi, Walt. Just fine. How are you?
I'm doing well, and it's great to see you. And I see we're both in our studio, so
yes.
All right. People get an idea of what we are about. That's for sure. I think that for the people who are watching tonight, but really what we're about is, I'm going to ask Ann a number of questions. All right. She's going to do most of the talking. She's going to talk about her work. All right. And right now, Ann, maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself, how you started, your experience, with your teaching, and then maybe, what you expect from your students.
Yes, let's see. Well, I can say that I've always done art, and I started taking painting when I outside of school, just at a painting studio when I was 13. I did AP art in high school, took it all throughout. I had a double major at UVA. In studio art and art history. Now, I was a terrible art history student. I only did that for my own enrichment, and I approached it. I was not good, but I just wanted to see a lot of art. And then I traveled a bit. I worked for a while, saved my money, went traveling for several months in Europe, looked at art there, came back and started at AU, which I found a great place to be. I had a studio outside of school. Let's see. So what can I say? I would say about myself that I have always, increasingly, I would say that what drives my work is how the abstract aspects of the work function within the piece. And so that is how I teach. I frequently work in a representational way. Sometimes it borders on surrealistic. It's sort of imaginative. Sometimes it's just sort of straight painting outside in the landscape, or pieces of, still life setups. But what drives my work, and I think what drives art usually, is how it works on an abstract level, how the colors work together, how the textures that you can get with paint. The other thing I'd say is the older I've gotten, the more abstract my work has gotten. And I always think it's all about the paint. I've thought to myself, I want to have a website called It's All About the Paint, because to me, that's what is interesting in art. We don't need um, uh, to create pieces that look like photographs anymore. You can have a lot of fun. And I also think that your attitude in art, while you're working, you have to have a very positive, playful attitude. You have to experimental. You have to be willing to lose it all, and push yourself. And that's when art becomes it is like something you grow with. You grow with all your life. And it's something that I always tell my students, no matter what happens to you in life, you've always got your art. It is so undervalued. You always have it. You can your parents can kick you out of the house. You can get married and get divorced. Your best friend can tell you to go to hell. Your family can write you off, but you can always go back into your artistic space, and it's like something. It's like a best friend.
Yeah,
So
and
that's
well, you've had many years of doing this. Our careers are very similar, and I look at I went to AU too, so I have a little experience with the instructors, probably a number of them that you studied with when you were there. I think what I find about your work, which I think is really so strong, is your intensity and your uniqueness. I mean, you are truly an outstanding artist, but an outstanding painter. You understand paint. And I think that when students study with you, this is one of the things that they're going to get, particularly, is an understanding of what that paint, it's a language I would look at, and what that language communicates is in the knowledge of the paint, So I think you show that in your work for sure. Is there anything like, for instance, artists that you're more attuned to, perhaps as far as influences on your own work is concerned?
well, I would say that uh, for many years, in fact, I would say decades, I would say that it took me a while to really appreciate Cezanne as a painter. When I first started painting, I studied him in school, and they'd say the father of modernism, he really was who the Cubists looked for and all that. I It took me a while before I could appreciate how incredible Cezanne was in his approach, in the way that he handled paint. And he's an inspiration to anybody, because if you look at his early work, he had to struggle. He was kind of an awkward painter. His drawings are awkward. His handling of things was awkward. And what's interesting is how he developed his own sensibilities, how he developed his own approach. And he sort of kept a distance from the people in Paris. He didn't feel comfortable with that. And he just kept doing his own thing. And gradually, he just became an incredible painter. So I would say he's interesting. And then I would say another person that was mentioned to me when I was in college, and I didn't know that much about him, was Richard Diebenhorn, because I was doing a lot of landscape painting, and my professor in college said, "Do you know his work?" And it was only, once again, after I got out of school, that I started to appreciate Diebenhorn, his ability to draw, his way of working. Um, and so, in fact, the rules of Diebenhorn, I think they are great. His notes to himself about painting. And then finally, this is somebody that I'm not sure if he's so influential to me in terms of his actual work, although probably he's an incredible colorist, tonalist, very interesting texturally, is Wolf Kahn. And I watched a great YouTube lecture he was giving, and he said, anyone who knows me, first of all, he's incredible to watch. He's really articulate, funny sense of humor, very insightful. But he said, anyone who knows me knows that I have three mottos in my approach to art. He said, the first one is follow the brush, which I think is great. The second one is I just work here. And the third one is who gives a bleep?
Yeah.
Anyhow. And I thought, I tell my students that all the time, because it's so liberating, his approach. When he says follow the brush, he's talking about you do what the paint says, you do what the medium says, you do what the piece tells you to do. When he says, I just work here, he sort of downplays this view of art that is, he sort of, it's liberating to say, hey, I'm just doing this. It's a job to me. I'm just doing this because I do it. That's what I do. And in fact, if you saw Richard Diebenhorn interviewed, they'd say he said the same thing. He says, I don't know how I would have spent my life if I didn't paint. He said, that's what I do. And then finally, it's very liberating when he says, who gives a bleep anyhow? That's how you have to approach art. So those are sort of interesting people. I could read you the 10 rules of Diebenhorn, you know, that you just always push. You don't do, always push into unknown territory, basically. Never know where you're going to end up. Chaos is good. Use what, let me see, actually, I'm going to just pull it up for a second because he's more articulate than I am. He says, attempt what is not certain. Certainty may or may not come later. It may then be a valuable delusion. I love the lack of reverence, the irreverence that you see in so many artists' views. And then he says, do search, somehow don't be bored, but if you must, use it in action. Use the destructive potential. And he says, mistakes can't be erased, but they move you from your present position. Tolerate chaos and be careful only in a perverse way. He has a few other rules, but I'm not going to go into those. I just like his attitude.
Yeah, I think that, you know, we both share the artists that you mentioned. I think myself, I really enjoy their work. I think that they've really, you know, can inspire students. So when you teach, all right, if someone was taking a course with you, what would they expect?
Let's see, first of all, most of the time I say, I think you can push it. I think it can be pushed. Some people don't want to be pushed, but the people who usually end up liking my work, liking working with me, they want to be pushed. And I say, now that doesn't mean that you have to push it immediately. Stick it up on your mantelpiece, pound a nail in the wall and just stick it up. And while you're having a glass of wine or while you're chatting with somebody on the phone, kind of glance at it out of the corner of your eye. And that's when you can start seeing what you like and what you don't like in a piece. So I would say that I encourage people to push themselves to keep going with pieces, see where the textures lead you, build those layers. Let's see, what else would I say? Have fun, be experimental, just make a mess. Make a mess, because that's when you can really liberate yourself. The most dangerous thing is when you have a part of your painting that you're madly in love with it. You think, oh, isn't this wonderful? I love it. And you start, I had a teacher once, Richard Crozier, down at UVA, and he was an incredible painter. And he said, he saw me painting a still life, and I'd painted it with the flowers, and I loved the flowers in the vase, but I had to deal with the surrounding space. So I was dealing with it and dealing with it, and he kept coming around. He'd sort of look at, and then he'd look at me and he'd frown, and finally he came around and he looked at me and he said, sometimes, in his soft voice, sometimes you might find that the part of the painting that you think is the very best part is the part that's holding you back. And that is a big clue. And he was absolutely right. Which brings me to another point. I would say that I really am into the negative space. I think that the negative space is the scaffolding that you build a picture on. People frequently want to paint or draw the actual object, and it is all I can do to keep saying, wait, how do you get from this point to that point? And that's all negative space. And people talk about it, but it's negative space is a very important part, an active part of the composition, and it has to be really attended to. And it seems to me, if I had to say something about my work, one of my sisters once said to me, Anne, it seems like you're always painting the background. The background, I spend so much time working those negative spaces because you don't think about it. It's not always obvious, but that's how you move the painting around. So,
Well, then how about someone who's new and doesn't have a lot of experience? How would you handle working with them?
Um, Usually I just tell them to dive on in. The worst that happens is that you mess up a piece of paper or you lose a canvas. And then if you've lost a canvas, you can always come back, let it, and rework it. When I teach my classes, lots of times I tell people, do you have any paintings that you're not real happy with that you're just storing? Well, why store it for posterity if you're not happy with it? You have to be excited by your work. And so um, the worst that can happen is you don't do something that you make a, I'm going to put this in quotes, you make a mistake and you learn so much. It's one of the great things in life is that we are allowed to make mistakes, especially in art. Just make a mess. Try it out, see what happens.
Yeah, and I think that, I know you and I know your background, you're very skillful. You bring a lot of that knowledge as well to your work. Would you call yourself a colorist?
Um, Walt, these are hard things to describe. You know, I would say that I pay attention to color. Yeah, I would say probably I'm a colorist. Because it drives me crazy if the color isn't right. The tone isn't right. And it's not that there's a good tone and a bad tone. There's always many options out there. But you have to make sure that the tone, the color that you choose, that it relates to all the other colors. And I'm going to use the word tone because most colors are slightly off. And you have to make it so that they relate to one another. And so you can have a beautiful blue, but it might be the wrong blue for the painting. It has to relate somehow to the other tones in the painting. So yeah, I'd say I'm a colorist and probably very much into texture.
Yeah, you like that surface. The other thing that I find with your work is the vibration. I think that that's one of the keys as well. And I think when you're talking about how colors work in relationship to each other, it's like putting a piece of music together. And I'm looking at the painting behind you, and just feeling the music in it, even though I know it's not finished. It has so much in it already. And I think this is one of the things for anybody who's watching the video on Anne. One of the things that I can pass on to you is, I admire her work and I admire the way she thinks. And I honestly feel that, one of the things that she gives to her students, she really brings that experience to the student. And I think you put them in a more contemporary attitude of thinking as well, which I think is a little different than being taught to paint like the 17th century. I mean, you're not a 17th century painter. Where do you see yourself?
I see myself, okay, this is where I see myself. And I'm glad you asked that question because I ask myself that question all the time. I wake up, I've been painting for decades. I'm not going to tell you how many, but I have been painting for decades. And it's been the one thing that, as I said earlier, it's the one thing that I always have. It's always there for me. I would say that at the same time, it used to be a joke because once I start painting, I will go to my husband and I'll say, Peppy, you won't believe this, but I'm just now starting to get it. I'm just now starting to get what painting is about. I feel like I am still learning and it is a struggle. And I feel like I wake up and I have to relearn it all, or don't have to. I want to start at the beginning. And lots of times I'll look at a painting, I'll go, I'm going to just take it apart and push it. Take it apart and just start all over and see where the paint takes me. And I look at other painters a lot. And I'm amazed at how many good painters are out there, including yourself, Walt.
Thank you.
But there's a lot of great painters out there and people who are very serious and sincere in their approach to art and how they trying to capture something. And so I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I I would say that to me, art is a lifelong struggle. And it's one of the great things about it is you never have all the answers.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, when you're discussing this, I think that we're both in the same, we feel the same way. We've been painting for years. If we had just fallen into a style of painting and reproducing that old idea over and over again, painting wouldn't be fun. It
Right.
really is, it is something that needs to grow. And I think that that's, you know, something, you know, it's something inside you that grows. So I feel, you know, you share that with your students. And I think it's, from my point of view, it's incredibly authentic. All right. You're not being an illustrator. I mean, this is not the kind of thing that you are. You really are about the understanding of what it is to be creative. And I think, you know, this, and certainly everybody has to go through the different, I would call them maybe steps, all right, until you reach an understanding. But that understanding is with yourself. And I think that that's the key. So, and then a lot of times, you know, I think people sometimes get confused about painting because they think that it's about a picture, all right? Mm-hmm. And we both don't think that it's about a picture. So I think
right.
that this is the key that I feel, you know, whenever I'm talking to my students, I know, and I'm sure it's similar, is that, you know, I tell them, paint a painting, don't paint a picture, you know, mm-hmm. And paintings may take 40 years to finish.
So. I have paintings that are going on. You know? I pull them out, I rework them. I put them in shows and then I'll look at them across the way and I'll think, oh, now I see. That bugs me. And actually, I'll tell you something funny, Walt.
Oh, that's so
I was talking with a curator at the Phillips Gallery. Mm-hmm. And it was about a painting that I was working on, and I was saying, you know, they're never done. And then she said, I told her about how when I was I was out of college, but I put up a show, and then I was like, wait a minute. And I went and I got my paint box after the show was hung, and I climbed on a ladder. I said, this is bugging me. So I got out the paint and started working on it. And she said to me, I'll tell you something funny. When Bonnard came to the Phillips, he had a painting on the wall and he said, uh-oh. He said, who's got a paint box here? And he started working on it.
Unbelievable.
It is a growth. A painting is it's alive. And you have to, and the one thing that I hate in my work is once things get too settled, there has to be this kind of freneticism, this fight to be alive. And I also will say another thing that the same teacher down in Charlottesville, Richard Crozier, once said to me. He said, you know, you'll find that when you start a painting, you always come in and you have this idea of how the painting's going to be. He says, and as you go along, increasingly you're going to find that you're in a conversation with the painting. And by the end of the painting is telling you what to do. And I think that that's a real insight too.
Yeah, it's funny how you run through these stages in your work. And, you know, I have this word that has been in my mind here. I'm going to share it with you for quite a while here. And it's the painting is the pulse of the universe, meaning if you can bring that to your painting, you've really managed to hit something. And I think that is always in the back of my mind. So it's really about that kind of thing. So let's go on to your work now. Okay, I'm going to share the screen, all right, so that everybody can see your work, and we're going to play from the current slide. So you can discuss some things here now with us, and you know, we'll start with the first one. I'll let you do all the talking.
Well, this painting, it's just about how the clouds. I actually did this painting. It's from Maine, and it's a large painting, but the sky was incredible. It was so dramatic. It was right before a storm. It was so dark. There were dark areas, and then you had the light reflected in the bay. This was between Deer Isle and the mainland, actually. And so I just stopped and pulled over. But let's see, what else can I say about it? I wish you could, I probably should have put in some close-ups, but I didn't. But there's a lot of texture in it, and there's a lot of variation in the blues and the tones, pushing them toward grays, the blues toward grays, purples, greens. And then just to try and capture that heavy atmosphere. That is what I would say about this painting.
Yeah. I can really feel it, and honestly, one of the keys to really a good painting is the holistic view, and you don't get caught up in one thing. You really are experiencing the whole thing at once. It's a beautiful piece, wonderful color, and I know the spot, by the way. I'm very familiar with that area, so I did a lot of painting in and around Deer Isle. So here's the next one.
Yeah, this one was down at the James River. I went and met my son, and we went to a place. We were driving along the Southern Virginia area along 81, and we just sort of got off the road, and we would just follow roads till we found interesting places. And so we went to a place called Buchanan, not Buchanan. It looks like Buchanan, but they pronounce it Buchanan. And then we pulled off, and we saw this big hanging wooden bridge, which is quite famous in that area. And so we went to the bridge, and it was sort of maybe 6 p.m. or so. The sun was kind of going down behind the mountains, but the river was like glass. It was amazing how it captured the clouds and the light in the sky. So that's basically what I was trying to capture with that. You could see there are canoes and kayaks off to the side of the left-hand side. And then you just had this big reflection of the dark shadows from the trees. And so I thought it was a really beautiful view. Anyway, and I did this, this painting and the last painting, and I think the next painting were all paintings that I did trying to places my son Jacob traveled, who passed away a year and a half ago. And the thing is that Jacob was really into nature, and he was very much into the skies, and he would frequently call me and just tell me, look at the sky. Right now I'm looking at the sky. So I did a show last October in his memory called The Skies of Jacob. And so I was focusing on the skies in these paintings.
Mm-hmm. These are large paintings too. I mean, 30 by 40. I've got some canvases here in the studio, and they're good size. So people need to understand how you work. Do you use a palette knife? Do you use large brushes?
I use all of the above, yes. And I scrape in. I use the back of the brush. In fact, here's some of my paint brushes right now. They've got sort of paint on them. I always have things going, and lots of times I'll be painting, and then I'll flip around and I'll start drawing in with the back end of the brush. I use palette knives. I use also, sometimes I use oil sticks with the work. Sometimes I use these squeegee type of things and scrape. And sometimes I dig away. Sometimes I'll have a painting that has a lot of paint on, and I'll dig it out and start reworking certain areas.
Yeah, this is a powerful piece as well. And I'm thinking to myself, how many layers of paint do you find yourself putting on a canvas?
Gosh, well,
because it does look that way.
It maybe 20, 15, 10. It's like certain areas will have a lot, and certain areas I scrape out some places I get really quickly, and other areas I'll like it, then I don't like it, then I'll put in something else, I'll scrape it out, and then I'll say, oh, why did I change it? And then I'll push it back the way it was. And so a lot of these, a lot of these have many, many layers.
Mhm.
It takes me a long time to work these paintings. Anyway.
Do you find yourself working from memory or just from your mind's eye? Do you find that an important part of the way you resolve a painting?
Lots of times I work from memory. At a certain point, I'm sure you know this. You know when you've painted trees a lot and you've painted skies a lot, you can invent, and you can change things up to make the composition more powerful, or to soften certain areas. And so I find that I sketch. I also work. I guess you would say work from memory. I also take lots of photos whenever I go anywhere. And I was going to say that that when students work from photographs, I always say, don't just take one photo. Move around, go up, go down, zoom in, because the lighting changes, and also the cameras can't capture this quality of light that you get when you're outside. Anybody who has a camera, you can see it just can't capture that. But sometimes if you zoom in, you can capture a little bit of the color. You have to make mental notes, definitely.
Yeah, this is a beauty. And then the next one, this one I can see the scraping in that here, the really thick, thin relationship that you have.
Yeah, that one, this is a smaller painting. And I find that when I have smaller paintings, this is, I think, 11 by 14. So when they're smaller, you can see the texture more in the photograph. But I would say that the other paintings that we just looked at, they have at least this amount. This one doesn't have as much paint on it as the other ones. I got it in a few sessions. So and I always am thinking, when in doubt, go with what the painting wants.
Yeah, the painting is going to tell you. You're exactly right. All you have to do is say, painting, what you need. What do you need?
Tell me what to do.
Yeah, and it'll tell you. That's all you have to do is listen to the painting. The interesting thing about your work, which I get out of it, and I hope the viewers are getting out of it, is Anne orchestrates the paint. I think that it is in the orchestration of thick, thin, and her contrast and her color vibration, things like that, that you feel that pulse of the universe in her work. There's no doubt. All right. And I think that you're one of the artists that I can truly say, when I look at your work, I feel it. All right. So it really is. It's magnificent work. So it borders on abstraction, and what you do, I guess, is in its simplifying. I think you find yourself doing that at the end of the painting, or how do you work with that?
Yeah, I try to constantly. I always tell people I'm a real couch potato, except when I paint. When I paint, I never have a studio big enough, because I like to walk far away and look at how the whole painting is reading. And so when I frequently literally put on a brush mark, and then I will walk across the room, look at it, and then I'll say, okay, now I need another color, and I'll go and I'll mix it, and then I'll be mixing the color, and then I'll look at the painting, and I'll have to walk back across the room to remember where it was that I thought I needed the color. So so I try to keep in mind the big shapes, the big movements. To me, I always tell people that composition is only about movements. And you can use, you're talking about music, Walt. I find that I use music terminology all the time. And so I can see why Whistler would talk about symphony or harmony, or he would name so many of his pieces after music. So did Paul Klee did this. A lot of artists do this, and a lot of artists feel this kind of meshing of music and art, because the texture, the rhythms that you create with a painting, it's all, I'm using musical terminology, but in terms of composition, it's all movement. That's all composition is how you move the eye, how you draw the eye here. And lots of times you have to, if it gets too staid in feeling, you have to jazz it up a bit. And see, now there's another musical term, but that's what you have to do. So I don't know if I answered your question.
Well, and you know, your work has a lot of physical qualities to it. In other words, you can feel the strength of your, you know, your energy in it. All right, which I think is really quite interesting. The next one, and you're doing a lot of these seashell ones, which is kind of interesting.
Yes.
So maybe talk how you. I love these, by the way.
Oh, this one, yeah, I love shells. And then I've done still lives with shells, but I also, I've put them in landscapes. And to me, this is where I think I was saying that sometimes I start off and my painting starts to become surrealistic, because the objects start becoming active players. I sort of create a drama in my head when I paint. And so this was actually started off as a still life with shells. And then I gradually, so often what happens is I don't like the space that the shells or the fruit or the flowers are in, and I start improvising. And I also, I do say to the students, you have to create, you have to almost view the painting as a drama that's taking place. And the drama can be between colors and shapes, but also these shells start to have a feeling, a character to them. Even when people draw fruit, I say, no, what is the character? Not all apples look the same. And you can go into the grocery store and you can find apples, and some of them look muscular, some of them look elegant. So, and the way that you sort of put them in relation to each other, you can almost create a drama between objects within a still life. But anyway, this one is it's called Lounging at the Shore. It was just because I just ended up deciding that the shells looked like they were hanging out with each other.
Yeah, this is a beauty, and it's very rhythmic and fluid, you know, the way you get the eye to move very comfortably in this painting. And it's intriguing by the color combinations. The next one, it's fascinating to see this stylistic change in your work here.
Yeah, this one, it's just sometimes I work and I kind of don't always have the same approach. Sometimes I'll go back to not pointillism, but I'll break color down and I'll say, okay, dab. I want the paint to be stronger in color, so I'll start dabbing with different colors, and I'll put colors against each other. But this one, once again, it's a bunch of shells that I had set up, and then it just started feeling, I think that there's the shell on the far right, it's almost a Baroque shell, I would say. It's got so much movement and this lightness, and it's got these feathery shapes, maybe even Rococo. You could call it a Rococo shell. But so I started going with those movements, these curvilinear movements of the shell, and then it just started moving into the clouds. And then before I knew it, it was like a dance. Lots of times I feel like painting is like a dance. And in fact, sometimes a student will say, well, what do you mean when you say scumble? What do you mean? I say, well, you just dance the brush across the surface. But dancing, it's got to have this energy. Mm-hmm. And when you dance, you can't be passive. You have to kind of really get into it. Yes. Anyway, so this one is samba. We just thought it looked like a party on the beach.
Yeah, it really, I'm enjoying these paintings, believe me. I mean, the I see how I respond. They see my interest, okay, and I'm intrigued by your color combinations and the way you apply your paint. That's for sure. And
This one, once again, it started off as just, if I tell you how, Walt, how I set up my still lives, sometimes I come in, I I used to buy so much fruit, and I'd come in because I was really into it for a while, and I'd come in and I'd just sort of take the fruit out and just sort of plop it down, and then I'd look at it and say, "Oh my God, there it is, the still life." It's so these are just plopped down apples, and they were really big and red and juicy apples. So I started painting them, and gradually I painted out the whole still life scene, and I started feeling like it's like I want it's kind of surrealistic. And then I talked with one of my daughters, and I said, "Oh, what am I going to call it? I think I'll call it falling apples or apples in tumbling down." But anyway, then we decided the fall. It has almost a, you could say, almost a religious implication with the fall, because they use the, in the Garden of Eden, that is the fall of mankind, and it's, you taste of this wonderful, the apple of knowledge, I guess it is. But anyway, I just at some point felt like putting a sky behind the apples.
yeah, and the saturation, when you look at the intensity of the color and the vibration of that color, I mean, it is strong and really it intrigues us, compels us to look at it. I think the richness of those reds, I feel, I internalize. I can almost taste them. They're delicious. All right. So anything else before we move on to the next one?
We can move on to the next one.
Okay. And then this one.
This one is sometimes I love plants also. I love things in nature. I find nature just always amazing. And this one, it just sort of happened. But sometimes I would say that when I look at setups, I get tired and bored. Okay, you can go back to Diebenhorn. Um, Looking at a setup in a normal way. So I started at some point deciding, well, I'm just going to look straight down at the pot. I love pots of plants, and I used to doodle them and paint them all the time. And then at some point, I decided to look down, and I thought that it goes well with the shape of a grapefruit, for example. You've got that repeated shape. And I just, this is an aloe plant, but it's, and then the lemons were there, and then it just sort of evolved.
Yeah, it's again, this kind of aerial view where we're looking down or looking up, I think, really makes an interesting design. And you really take advantage of the movement in this the plant to really lead our eye around to all the other areas in the painting. I think it's a really very, very interesting one. So then the next one.
This is a Fruit in Orbit Pink Cosmos. At a certain point, I was painting a lot of fruit in a still life setup. I had this shelf, and I loved looking straight on at it. But then at a certain point, I started looking down more, and then I started feeling like these fruits are shaped almost like planetary orbs in the cosmos. And so I started just sort of playing around with that idea. Now, I didn't want to just make all of it against a sky, a dark blue sky. So I just started playing with color. And so that's what I can tell you about this. It has a lot of texture also in it. And
yeah, and
but
I could see you departing from the from the realistic part or the representational part, and really giving us this abstract feeling, but the way you sculpt the paint. I mean, this is what makes your paintings interesting, I think, is how you understand paint. So that worked out well. Anything else?
No.
Okay. So then the next one.
And this is I thought I would also, you asked me to send in a variety of things. This is a drawing I did in pastel of my son Jacob. And it's kind of captures it. It definitely looks like my son Jacob did. But, and the other thing is when I teach pastel, I try to encourage people to not just fill in and to sort of, if you're going to use line as an expressive vehicle to convey something. So, um, so this painting or drawing, um, it's I worked on it a long time. It took me so long, Walt, to get it so it looked like my son. And when I showed it to the people in my family, they said, "Oh my God, that's so Jacob," because he had a very intense quality about him. But I also didn't want to just fill in, so I must have put the nose in 20 times. I'm not kidding. I kept putting it in, taking it out, the lips. That's why when I saw those high school students do those portraits, I know how hard it is to get everything in its correct proportion. But also, to me, I wanted to have this kind of expressive quality to the line. And that's how I would say when I teach drawing, whether it's in black and white or whether it's with pastel, I emphasize that. I would say that, um, in fact, that if you look at drawing books, they always start off with contour, line. And I always, first thing I do in my drawing class is say, don't want to see any lines. We're going to focus first on value. And then midway through the class, I'll say, okay, now we're going to bring in line, but it's not line as outline. It is not line. The line should show volume. It needs to convey an emotion. It has to be very expressive. So that's what I would say about this piece is I feel like it does capture it's very open in how it works. It's not filled in.
Yeah, and that what you touched on with line, I honestly feel, artists sometimes think that the line is only to start an idea, all right, but boy, you can use it and you can finish it with line, and I feel you got a really powerful one here, Anne. So then the next one.
This is just another pastel. And both of these were done on sanded paper, so you can really build up the surface. But once again, so this one is it's maybe a little bit more traditional in feel, but at the same time, lots of times I leave areas. I like this kind of areas where it doesn't have any pastel, and also to have the drawing quality, the search. And that brings me to something I'd like to say, and that is, for me, drawing is it's a search, a perpetual search, and that's what I actually called my website. I called it the perpetual search because I feel like I'm on a perpetual search. But it's for the perpetual search for the right quality of line, the right touch, the right mark in the right location, and it's a search. And so I look at Giacometti. I look at so many artists, and they are constantly searching, and their work has a real energy. Sometimes I feel when things are too filled in that they stop breathing, and that goes back to a painting. A drawing has to be alive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great color in this piece, by the way. And you teach pastel, so you have a class in pastel, right?
Yes, yeah. Yes, I do.
The Yellow Barn. All right, so then this one, fascinating.
Yeah, this one is Walt. This one, it's on actual sandpaper, the most coarse sandpaper you can find. It is with oil pastel, not my usual, pastel, which is soft pastel. You can get incredible oil pastels by Sennelier and wonderful colors, but the only problem with working on sandpaper is you file those, you go through your pastels quickly, and a lot of times it falls off because it's not really absorbent. But I really love the pebbled, textured quality of it. So, and this one was all about light in the sky. It was also up in Maine. So, and they just get, I mean, you could live in Maine. You could do 1,000 paintings a day from the light, the way the light changes up there. It's just incredible. And the way the ocean reflects those changes. So
I'm intrigued by this surface, you know, that I'm thinking to myself, God, if only Seurat or some of the divisionists were able to see see how simple it would have been, all right, to use that surface to really create the vibration that you know, the optical vibrating qualities in this piece. It's really quite interesting. Yeah, I'm really impressed by that one. So I guess that's the size of the sandpaper is 9
yeah,
by
that's right. And I actually did a vista, but I had to put several pieces of sandpaper together.
yeah.
And I'm trying to figure out how to use, how to create my own paper that's probably more archival. But this stuff seems to hold up, and I really liked working on it, but I will say that it does eat through your pastels.
Yeah, yeah, I would imagine. Okay, and then the last piece.
This is a watercolor collage piece. I'm working on a book of the Jabberwocky, and that also is in memory of my son Jacob, who loved nonsense literature. He really liked Lewis Carroll. He actually went to Oxford and he studied nonsense literature. That's one of the only class that I was sure that he took. And he was a mathematician like Lewis Carroll, but he just loved that book. He learned that poem, and he learned it as a kid. Now, so the Bander Snatch, like if you're familiar with the poem, none of it is. It's all made up words. It's made up creatures. So, but the Bandersnatch is supposed to be kind of based on like a wild cat. So this one is torn pieces of watercolor paper. At first, I started doing the image, and then I started feeling very held in by the rectangular shape of the watercolor paper. So I started ripping out parts, and this is not finished. This is in progress. I might add to it, but it's got also papers using Collage as paper and home. The tail has some. It's hard to see, but it has some homemade papers that have. A friend of mine was making paper out of rose petals. And so the brown spots in the tail are actually pieces of rose that are chopped up in a blender, and then they kind of lost that pinkish color. They turned brownish, and then some of the paper is from that tie paper that has a lot of fiber, and sometimes it's a little bit transparent. So you can rip through stuff and have a lot of fun with it. So this is sort of a fun thing that I'm working on, and I'm doing the whole poem, and so that's what I can say about this piece.
Yeah,
It started off with watercolor only, and then it gradually became collage, and then I'd go back in with watercolor. And
yeah, when I look at your work, and I really feel that your work is like you said, it kind of grows, the idea grows, and you're very, very much into experimenting, which I think when students really are going to take your class, one of the unique things about being creative, you can have all the techniques, but if you don't have something to say, I think that's the challenge. You always have, it's very evident in your work that experimentation is important, And I think that, and sometimes beginning students don't understand that, but I think that, studying with you, they will. So now we're going to be back to you. Is there anything you want to say to the audience before we end our little interview?
well, Walt, I would like to say that I think you're a great director of the Yellow Barn, because I think about this often. Um, I love how you run classes. I like teaching at the Yellow Barn because you give the artists and the teachers, the people teaching, you give us such freedom, such uh, we can sort of pick and choose and direct completely our classes, how long we want it to be. And that's really important. You're very flexible. So I would like to say thank you, Walt, for being Walt, because I know that you've got a real positive attitude that comes through. And let's see. And I was going to say, I love to teach. I love to be involved with my students. So that's all I can say. I don't know if I have anything else.
Well, you know what? We're so lucky to have you. I'm going to say this to this audience. Honestly, take a class with Anne. All right. Uh, you're going to learn so much, but you're going to learn something that's really human. And I feel when you watch this interview, you got a real good feel for it. This is, you know, this is painting right from the heart. It's your own inspiration. And I think that Anne communicates that very, very well. And honestly, for anybody who's starting out, don't be hesitant because it's a great place to start. All right. So with that, Anne, I'm going to say thank you so much. You're a great friend. Honestly, that you're an incredible teacher. And God, the Yellow Barn is so lucky to have you. All right. So with that, folks, I'll say goodnight and sign up for Anne's classes, yellowbarnstudio.com.